I spoke to Brazilian sports journalist Jamil Chad about the business of branding at the FIFA World Cup. Now, he's in Moscow for all the tournament action and joined us from there. I started by asking him about the competition between athletic brands.
Well, it depends on how we count this battle, but for sure, at this moment, we have Nike and Adidas head-to-head in many aspects, and we have many of the big national teams obviously fighting not only on the pitch but also outside. It is a commercial battle. It is something that happens every 4 years, and thus it is very important for sales.
It's been a bit of a roller coaster. We've seen a lot of upsets at this year's World Cup, and that can be hard to predict if you're a sponsor who's really tied yourself to a particular celebrity, a particular star player or team. So in terms of return on investment, who should be most worried at this point?
Well, if you take in a way that, in a more general way, what you see is that you have, at the same time, brands investing in teams, in national teams, but also in particular players. You have today, for example, Neymar with over 90 million followers on social media. So it is a product by itself, beyond the national team. The same thing happens with Messi, the same thing happens with Cristiano Ronaldo. It is a battle that goes not only to the national teams, but also to focalize players that represent a lot. They are actually not only players, they are products. You have seen, for example, even here in the streets of Moscow, a dispute of basically pictures or basically images of all of these players fighting neck to neck in every corner of this town. You don't actually need to go to the stadium to find them.
Now, something interesting that we saw was Nigeria's national jersey by Nike flying off the shelves, selling out around the world in pre-sales, breaking records that would rival annual sales for some of these top-tier league clubs. So what drove that phenomenon, and how does Nike really keep up that pace?
Yeah, that is an amazing story, because Nigeria, for example, did not even qualify for the next round. And this is quite something. If you think that you need a result on the pitch to make basically your product to sell, that is not the case with Nigeria. This is an example of how you actually have a national team that in a way was so popular, and with I would say, with a design that matched many of the fashion, I would say, industry even around the world. This made the product to sell very well, not only in Europe, not only in the US. This was something that was shown basically around the world. Even in my home country, in Brazil, this was the case as well, even with the national team of Brazil obviously being the main factor there of business.
And we certainly saw politics spilling onto the pitch this year with Iran's team and Nike pulling the national team's cleats. Are you surprised? Is that something we can expect to see continuing?
Absolutely. We cannot distinguish, we cannot make a separation or create a wall between politics and what happens at the World Cup. What what happened to the Iranian team was basically the result of international sanctions. That was not the only case. A Mexican football player has a very important problems with justice in the United States, also cannot be shown with some of the brands. You have other aspects of this World Cup that also makes it very clear to everyone that thinks that politics and soccer does not mix. Yes, it does. It is very clearly a story that has this other dimensions to it.
Someone who's not present at this year's World Cup is China. Now, even though they didn't qualify, you wouldn't know it by a lot of the presence in terms of advertising that we're seeing there. Why is having that sort of presence still significant?
Well, if you think 3 years ago, FIFA went through a major crisis when many of its officials were arrested. When that happened, obviously, many of the brands tried to reevaluate if it was reasonable to have a link to FIFA at that moment. And what happened at that point was that it created vacuums. It created space for other brands from other places of the world to basically come and sign deals with FIFA. Today, out of the 20 commercial partners that FIFA has, 12 out of the 20 come either from China or from Russia. If you take just the Chinese brands, there are 7 of them out of 20 brands sponsoring the World Cup. And if you compare that, for example, to the Western brands, you have only 5 Western brands today. Soccer will always be attractive.